Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Building People-Powered Budgets, an organizers roundtable on 2021 city budget campaigns. This event's being brought to you by the Forge and PowerSwitch Action, so thank you all for joining us today. My name is Edgar Beltran. I'm a senior campaign lead with PowerSwitch Action. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm based in Los Angeles. PowerSwitch Action is a national organization that builds power for people and institutions for people to realize our collective freedom and liberation, to realize multiracial feminist democracies in our cities, towns, and counties. We were formerly known as the Partnership for Working Families, but recently underwent a rebrand to coincide with the launch of our visionary long-term agenda. So for today's event, I'm actually have the honor of being an MC and panel moderator with some of my favorite people. So I'm really thrilled to have this opportunity. Today's roundtable actually follows a September article published in the Forge that elevated the perspectives from PowerSwitch Action affiliates leading and supporting local budget campaigns. We decided to organize this space because of the ever-increasing and ongoing organizing around local budgets. Our affiliates and our partners have been doing budget campaigns for various years, so we recognize that there are incredible perspectives and lessons to share across our campaigns and movements. Equally important, we also recognize that our individual fights may seem dispersed, but are actually interconnected in very obvious and indirect ways. So for today's panel, I'm happy to share that we're actually having 2 PowerSwitch Action affiliates, as well as 2 partners, and putting us all in conversation to reflect on the past, assess the moment, and contemplate future campaign strategies and tactics. I'm excited to jump in, but before I do want to introduce our all-star lineup. Liana Molina is based in Oakland and is a senior campaign director with the East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, a PowerSwitch affiliate. John Wee Tran is based in San Diego and is an organizer with the Center on Policy Initiatives, also a PowerSwitch affiliate. And Kennedy Bartley is based in Chicago and is the legislative director with United Working Families, a partner of our Chicago affiliate, Grassroots Collaborative. I wanted to note that Brittany Alston, one of our featured panelists, is unable to be with us today, but her colleague, Arielle, has graciously agreed to join us today. Arielle Klagsbrun is based in Philadelphia and is the Deputy Director of Tax the Rich Philadelphia at the Action Center for Race and the Economy, better known as ACRE. So before I start, I do want to give a roadmap of like our time together, right? So we only have 60 minutes. I know folks are incredibly busy and got lots going on. There's active budget fights right now. So I really want to respect that time and just recognize that we want to maximize this hour, but also create space for us. So for today's event, we are being live streamed and we also are being recorded. So you can always go back to the today's conversation and share it with your colleagues and co-conspirators. Second of all, the flow of our time together will consist of opening remarks from our panelists. So we get to hear from everyone to to match faces with names and get us off to a good start. And then we're going to go into a discussion section where we'll hear from everyone. And then lastly, we'll hear some closing remarks from each of the panelists. I do want to note that to make this discussion more interactive and meet your needs, halfway through the discussion section, we're actually going to be sharing a poll with some list of topics that we can cover during the last part of the discussion. So we definitely want to get your feedback in terms of what we want to cover for the last portion of the discussion. So with that in mind, and with no further delay, I'm excited to really just jump in and hear from our amazing speakers. So we're going to start off with the opening remarks. So this question goes for everyone, but could everyone please share a bit about why your organizations and partners are actively organizing around local budgets and a bit about your long-term goals? And to get us started, I'm gonna pass it to Liana.
Thank you so much, Edgar. And thanks to PowerSwitch Action for hosting this awesome panel. I'm really excited to be here and to share our experience working on the City of Oakland budget over the last few months and the last several years. And so I'll tell you a little bit about EBASE. We work to advance economic and racial justice by bringing together labor, community, and faith-based institutions to build power and improve the quality of life for low-wage workers, both in the workplace and in our communities. So we do that by partnering with unions, worker centers, community organizations on different campaigns, everything from protecting essential workers during the pandemic by passing emergency paid sick leave, right to return to work laws, to fighting for community benefits from large-scale development projects like what the Oakland A's are proposing at the port to build a new ballpark. And we're also pushing for tenant rights out in Contra Costa County, which is a little bit further out in the East Bay here in the Bay Area. And so EBASE has been involved in shaping the City of Oakland's budget over the last 10 years in partnership with our allies. And our long-term goals have really centered around putting more resources into community services, into our public sector workers, and moving away from subsidizing developers and oversized police budgets. And in the last few years, our advocacy has been focused specifically on prioritizing money that would help lift low-wage workers and enforce workers' rights laws that would direct those resources into both community-based outreach, as well as standing up a new city department that's called the Department of Workplace and Employment Standards. So that's been a particular niche that we've occupied in the broader budget fight. But here in Oakland, the budget fight really presents a unique opportunity for us to partner and to build and strengthen our relationships with our close labor and community allies, and also to support a broader progressive vision for how our budget can support vibrant economy and good jobs, public services, affordable housing, and a big piece is also reimagining public safety and reinvesting in arts and culture in our city. So I did also want to shout out our faith-rooted organizing initiative, FAME, the Faith Alliance for a Moral Economy, which has been a big part of the budget fights and helping to lift up a vision for a moral budget, and also engaging faith leaders to call on our elected leaders and to help shape a public narrative that helps lift up the budget as a moral document that reflects how we want to treat everyone in our community with dignity. And so finally, I'll just say that in this last budget fight, we really start to experimenting with this idea of co-governance with some of our progressive elected leaders. And so, part of that is helping to shape what our allies inside are doing, and then doing the work on the outside strategy to support them, right, to move things forward politically. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And again, I'm really excited to share with you our fight for a people's budget this year. So with that, I'll concede the floor to my next colleague.
Thank you. I'll pass it on to Arielle.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So I work with ACRE, the Action Center on Race and Economy, which is a research and organizing hub that focuses on the way that Wall Street is intentionally extractive from historically Black and Brown communities. And we work with base building organizations, both at the state and local level, on campaigns that move people into the streets to challenge the financial and tech sectors. And in Philadelphia, we're part of a campaign called Tax the Rich PHL, which is a coalition of community groups and worker organizations that are fighting for real progressive revenue in the city budget. And I think our approach is, if we want to effectively really challenge corporate power, we need to truly critique and fight the systems that are being used to exploit poor communities. And we know that a huge way that Wall Street corporations generally are extracting resources are through financial tools like public budgets and our taxation structures. And I think we've all been part of campaigns, whether you're in a community organization or a labor union, that, you know, demanded fully funded communities, schools, housing, mental health services, et cetera, and then been told time and time again by elected officials, we just don't have the money for that, we're under budget. And I think, you know, the way we see it is that there are a million neoliberal and racist reasons that they use to justify an austerity agenda. And when I say austerity, I mean that's budget cuts to critical services and infrastructure, tax cuts to the rich. And we see that austerity budget, it isn't just something that's happened, it's been planned. And we see a huge connection between the fact that corporations have paid less and less of their taxes on the municipal, the state level, and the federal level. And then a connection where when our cities are robbed of money and we need financing to, you know, build new schools or renovate things, right? We're forced into a relationship with Wall Street, where banks then profit off of the fact that we need loans and make, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars off of cities in high interest payments and fees. And we know that these are political choices and they're like inherently racist, they're inherently misogynistic, right? There's the whole relationship, you can go back to the Reagan era around the language of welfare queens and how people are dependent on public budgets. And then we see also the connection between our budgets and policing, right? Because it's the same communities that are having services cut that are over policed. And so I think the way that ACRE and Tax the Rich PHL have been thinking about our campaigns is that we've been trapped in this cycle of we need to stop X tax cut or, you know, stop austerity, stop these like very necessary cuts to, you know, education funding or school funding. But that's put us in a really reactionary position. And so how do we all on the local level change that relationship to being going on the offensive to say we actually deserve fully funded communities and we're going to tax the rich to get there. And so I think similar to Liana, we see these as like really moral budgets, moral, like these, how we talk about budget fights are actually about like morality of who is funded, how neighborhoods are funded. And we see that there's like three components, and this is kind of what makes up our Tax the Rich PHL platform. You know, taxing the rich and finding local revenue, defunding the police to free up real resources for treatment, not trauma, and then canceling Wall Street and ending the giant payments and connection between our Wall Street, how Wall Street profits off of our communities. So really excited to be here today and to learn from all of you about what's going on in your cities.
Cool, thank you. Kennedy, do you want to share?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Edgar. Yeah, so much gratitude to PowerSwitch Action for having me here. Really excited for the conversation today. And a huge shout out to the comrades on the call, as well as the Chicago Budget Coalition. So as Edgar shared, I'm the legislative director for United Working Families. We're an independent political organization across the city of Chicago, Cook County, and the state of Illinois, with elected officials at every level. We're made up of labor unions, grassroots community organizations, and elected officials. UWF began engaging with the budget, the city of Chicago budget, about 3 years ago in a really unprecedented way. You know, our predecessors in that fight are groups like No Cop Academy that really made meaningful demands of the budget as it related to the Chicago Police Department. But 3 years ago, we started engaging the budget in a more holistic way. United Working Families is, you know, committed to running rank and file black and brown folks for political office. But once they get there, there's a commitment to making, giving legislative expressions to demands on the ground. And the budget process is one of the key ways that we do that. So, Chicago, for context, has lived under decades of austerity budgets, much like, Arielle mentioned in Philly. And in a city like Chicago, which there aren't really partisan elections, everyone's a Democrat, but we recognize that means that folks are neoliberal and there are agendas to continue to privatize what we deem human rights. And so United Working Families and all of our partners, affiliates, and comrades fight to really make meaningful gains and create a party that is for the many and not the wealthy few, and really combat the status quo in Chicago. And so, it's really exciting stuff. We're actually in the thick of our budget campaign right now. The budget vote is slated to happen on the 27th, so next Wednesday. And so I'm excited to talk more about the I guess, granular level of what we're doing at this juncture. But yeah, just really incredible to see how far we've come in these 3 years and really, challenging power and redefining who holds that power and making sure that it's power for and not power over. So I'll stop there. But yeah, just really excited to get into the conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Kennedy. Jean-Louis? We can't hear you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jean-Louis, and pronoun he, him, his. I am an organizer with CPI, which stands for Center on Policy Initiatives. And I am the coalition organizer for a coalition called Community Budget Alliance. Our partners here have been organizing around the local budgets. We recognize that it was one of the ways we can bring resources and support our marginalized communities. The city continually underfund the communities that have been historically excluded and targeted by discriminatory policies for years. The CPA fight the status quo budgeting by developing people budgets that center community voices and address income and racial inequality. We've been organizing around the city budgets since 2012. We started organized around the infrastructure investment because that investment, it was very visible. Some area you go in here in San Diego, you go in, it's a very different scenery, different picture that what San Diego is known for. It's feel very divided in a way that sometimes, like San Diego is known to be a tourist area and beautiful beaches and everything. And then next thing you know, you drive to another neighborhood, it's completely different scene. That this investment was very visible. Our goal then, and still now, is to push for the city to invest in our neighborhoods and communities like streets, sidewalk, and park. But then over time, we recognize that it wasn't just about infrastructure anymore. It was about park programs that put resources into things that help to build people up is also important. Recognize that also the reason the coalition came together also is because we would recognize that we were being pitted against each other, that if we come together, then it will be much more powerful. As of today, the coalition have 24 organization partners. And over time, we begin to start acting like we were a council member. We have our own budget memo that we send to the council member, and then it convinced them to be on our side. I want to recognize what Liana would also said earlier too about the inside and outside strategy, as well as Kennedy recognizing, the Democrats as city council. So recently, as in San Diego, we have a simple majority Democrats on the city council now, 8 out of 9. But the status quo is still there. The system is still there. We still, at this point, I feel like our work not only just about advocating for the community priorities, but really how to deep dive into the question of like, what is the system that have been existing for as long as it has, and the same system that continuously giving us the inequities and all of the new elected official coming in. Despite that, we're still seeing the police budget is still getting increased, even in the middle of pandemic, actually. And despite the people coming in and voiced the concern and demand for defund the police, but the vote still went through. And it's just the same old budget that we're seeing over and over every single years. So at this point, it's no longer talking about equity. I feel like it's such a buzzword at this point, but rather for us to really address the status quo of the system. How do we undo all of that to create a new one in order for us to really truly address the systemic racism that influence the budget process at this point?
Yeah, thank you all for sharing and painting that picture, but also just sharing your why and why you do this work. And I think the next question to get us to the discussion is really taking a moment to take a step back and kind of reflect. So could you all share a bit about any wins you're proud of from your recent budget fights, outcomes or small things, big things, and any key takeaways that might be informing your current or future campaigns? And to get it started, I'll pass it to Liana.
Thanks, Edgar, and thanks to fellow panelists for sharing kind of a preview of the awesome work that you're doing on the ground in your communities. So here in Oakland, I would say that one of the first big wins I would claim is that just a large group of organizations coalesced around a unified platform, and we stuck it out week after week for months. It felt like forever, but we got through the budget process. And so that feels that in and of itself was noteworthy. We're part of the Refund Oakland Coalition, and this year we played a key role in helping to co-convene our partners. And so that included, racial justice groups, community orgs, housing folks, public sector unions. I mean, it really ran the gamut as far as the different interests at the table. And so I'll be the first to say it wasn't easy, but I think in the end, we were able to lift up our narrative and our issues and, help to create a space for broader community engagement in the process. So that feels important. And then in terms of actual wins in the budget, it's kind of hard to classify that because here in Oakland, we have a lot of problems that are facing our folks. And it doesn't feel like anything is enough to really and truly and adequately address the housing and the homelessness crisis that we're having and the levels of homicide and violent crime. Another issue is that the budget is not set in stone. And so the budget passed in June, but since then there's been a lot of back and forth, and it feels like we're constantly fighting proposals and threats to vital services and programs. So for example, in the last couple months, the mayor really was trying to close the Head Start program. And so that was a big deal that we had to mobilize, and we're still in the process of trying to beat back those cuts. And then with regard to police, there had been a proposal to reduce the number of police academies, and then that was reintroduced to bring back the original proposal. So it's just been kind of fight after fight after the whole budget process. But I will say that from our standpoint, we wanted to highlight a couple positive outcomes, which I mentioned earlier, the Department of Workplace and Employment Standards. So we did secure funding to be able to bring on additional staffing capacity. And those folks are going to focus again on enforcing some of the strong labor laws that we passed, like the minimum wage and emergency paid sick leave. And so that's important over the long term to increase the capacity of that department to do that work. And they're also bringing on a deputy director. So we're excited to be a part of that. And then the other big piece that I have to mention is around the investment of $17 million into the city's Department of Violence Prevention. I think around the country, there's been a lot of attention on Oakland around defunding the police. And contrary to the cops narrative, the city hasn't defunded OPD. right? What's happening is that there's a slow reallocation of some resources toward building, public safety infrastructure and developing alternative non-police responses to nonviolent emergencies. And so I did want to shout out some of our partners here in Oakland that are doing that work, the Anti-Police Terror Project and Mental Health First, MH1. If you're interested in more information about the macro program here on the ground, they're really working hard to craft that program to be a model for preventative services, not just here, but around the country, and to help meet our community's needs, while also ensuring that the people providing those services are, that the jobs are good paying union jobs. So that's what I'll highlight. And I think Jane Wee is next, if I'm not mistaken. So thanks.
Liana, that is really amazing to hear that you guys win, and I'm pretty impressed with your campaign in terms of like the defund the police movement. Down here, we have been advocating to reduce the police budgets for the longest time, and the votes didn't come through, as I shared earlier. However, I'm happy to say that our community did win a lot. We won 13 priorities this year. Some of the win that we're proud from last year, including Office for Labor Standard Enforcement, a dedicated office to enforce labor laws, consolidate some of the previous offices like minimum wages and living wages office. When the staff isn't workers center, workers suffer and don't get justice. Another office that we were able to win was the Office for Youth and Child Success. It also an office dedicated for all youth-related program services, data collection, and a new youth initiative. It is a beautiful collaboration between youth and adult allies. It would be one key takeaway for us there. The issues should be led by the community, its impact. So it's really beautiful to see like youth being so active in this process. Another one, data language access. We did some kind of action, which I'm going to share later, but basically we ended up winning new documentation and translation services to support people calling in, engage in the city council meeting. The city also created a work group to develop the city-wide language access solution, which we will be working with them this year to ensure the group take community input. And then the park investment, we were able to win a lot of money funding for the 4 parks in the low income and environmental justice communities. So the key takeaway from all of that is we have to build a movement first. The long-term struggle for me was a lot of the win that we saw today. It was the community battles, some of them even over 9 years to get to this point. But because we coalesce together, multiple organizations and coalition come together to push for the same thing, but not allow it to be pitted against each other. And we need to see that shared struggle, right? Like, and it doesn't. And then second thing that we also noted that it doesn't just end at the funding. It's also the implementation and ensuring the community-led process for the part development, staffing a new offices and holding the city accountable. Because when the votes happen and then people just don't even talk about it, they don't even follow up. It's our job to make sure that all of those things follow up and become the vision that we dreamed out to begin with.
Yeah, and I think I'm next up here. So as I said in my opening remarks, we started this more sophisticated budget coalition 3 years ago, and our demands were clear: defund the police, tax the rich, and invest in our communities. And I think that what we were tasked with was making very important distinctions to folks between policing and public safety, and clarifying when we say violence prevention, we mean that investments in our communities piece. And so political education and popular education were huge and paramount for us. And, in that first budget process, I think a huge win was getting our slate of aldermen to vote as a block. All voting no on that budget, a principled no vote, not in a, we aren't obstructionists, but when you sit at the table with folks who are experiencing houselessness, who are hungry, who do have like lead in their water, it's difficult to vote for a budget yeah, that, as we've said, budgets are moral documents. And when we don't see ourselves and our neighbors prioritized in that, we take principled no votes. And so I would consider that a win, as well as like winning over the people. In the following budget year, the mayor put out a survey asking folks like where they would like to see money directed, and 87% of survey respondents responded that they want to see money taken out of the CPD, the Chicago Police Department, and put into various investments into community. And this year, not much has changed. We're still demanding that the CPD be defunded, that we tax the rich, and that we invest in our communities. And, in past years, when we put forth legislation reflecting this platform, it's immediately sent to rules. And I don't know how other cities work, but we say rules is a place where legislation goes to die. And this year, all 8 of our budget amendments were sent to the budget committee. And we were faced with a high quality problem, I would call it, because then we were like, what do we need to see in order to, to merit a yes vote? And I think that was remarkable, and to see that the folks who were with us in the beginning are with us now and celebrating with us now. And we have a long way to go. But the fact that this co-governance piece that Liana brought up is what we've maintained throughout this whole process. And recognizing that, like, outside of the external wins, the infrastructure that we're building is a win, right? Like, we are recognizing how to be nimble, how to work with our elected officials as partners with us without hierarchy, right? And learning how to, again, make meaningful legislative expressions of demands on the ground so that we can engage in these budget processes in serious ways. So yeah, that's what I'll share there. And I think, Arielle, you're going to close us out.
Thanks all. It's great to hear about the similar connections across all of our cities. Yeah, so in Philadelphia, we wrapped our budget season in June, although it feels like the entire pandemic has been one long budget season. So, our coalition kind of came together right at the beginning of the first budget during the pandemic, when the mayor was saying we're going to have a $700 million budget deficit, and just beating the drum of preparing everyone for austerity. And in that moment, community groups and city workers came together to really put together like a people's budget proposal, which I think similarly feels like a huge victory for our organizations to be figuring out how we move together in the budget season. And so, there's a focus on where the money should go, and also where we could get revenue to fund, any potential gaps in the budget. And alongside, I think it was very amazing to see, kind of what happened with Defund the Police and the movement that was born, that was really crystallized last summer. And we really saw, just the impact of that in our budget season this year, with like multiple groups like the Homicide Law Project running campaigns that were really taking like both resources and also power away from the police, and had some pretty sizable victories. And this year, when the mayor introduced the budget, the demand was, do not use any of the stimulus money from the Biden administration for police raises or anything of that sort. And we saw that the police budget was actually held stagnant. So still feels like a lot of work to do in terms of actually taking that money away and lessening the amount. But it felt like a win nonetheless, that he knew that there would be pretty big opposition to any sort of increase in the police budget. And this year, we really saw kind of tax the rich frame our budget fight. I think with the federal stimulus dollars, the city was not in the same state of panic. And there were some people on city council who called themselves Democrats, but I think we could call them a different party, who really used the influx of federal resources to try to pass some corporate tax cuts, and said, oh, now that we have so much money coming in, we should really make Philadelphia a business-friendly environment. So there was actually 5 or 6 bills on the table this budget season to cut taxes for suburbanites, to lure suburbanites back into Philadelphia, because that would save Philadelphia, to cut business taxes, to cut taxes to parking lot CEOs, And we really saw our movement like take this in stride. People planned multiple direct actions, really mobilized, worked with our progressive city council members here in Philly to push back. And we were successful in cutting like 5.5 out of those 6 bills. So felt like a real some defensive work this year, but super advancing the narrative, both around tax the rich and around defund, that I think are going to lay a lot of groundwork for us as we transition next year, when we're going to be taking on a municipal wealth tax to provide some more revenue for the city.
Super exciting, everyone. And it's just great to see like the iterations and like the long-term power building while, staying nimble and responsive, and, building new offices and working on the implementation. So it's just really powerful. I'm going to take this moment to just put the poll out to the audience. So let us know and we'll keep it moving, but we'll see your responses and I'll adjust my scripts to meet sure everyone's needs. So we can move on to the next question. This is, we want to take a look at like the inner workings, right? So just curious if you can share how your budget setting procedures are helpful or not helpful in creating an inclusive and just city. And like, how do elected officials fit in, and like what needs to change? So I'll get to get us started. I'll pass it to Arielle.
Yeah, I feel like our budget process, I'm really interested in this question along different cities, but I feel like our budget processes are both extremely intentional and extremely unhelpful. So our process is that the budget is usually announced in the spring by the mayor, but the budget process actually starts months before then, when like department heads are starting to have, meetings with the mayor's office and figuring out what they want to ask for. But that is all behind closed doors. And I think we have not figured out at all how to kind of, if that's worth our time or how to intervene in that, because I think that's a huge place where a lot of decisions get made. Then after the mayor announces his proposed budget, there is a couple months of city council hearings. And those hearings are public and we usually mobilize for them. But again, it feels like the actual jockeying is happening behind the scenes, and it feels very difficult to influence, unless you kind of have, you can see lobbyists working that system, and like, well-oiled nonprofits, like service nonprofits in particular, can figure that out usually. But it's not a democratic place, and I think sometimes we've had problems obviously with the timing of hearings being during the day when people are at work, and struggling to figure out how to make that as democratic as possible for full engagement. And I think that is a place where we've like been falling by the wayside, and we need to really figure out the like real community investment in that process. That is like, again, about people heard, but then that actually being reflected in funding priorities. So it's not enough to just have the hearing at night. It actually has to be like tangibly related to a change that actually changes people's lives, to make it feel like it's worth it to engage in. And I think in Philly, like obviously, I think participatory budgeting is something that we're really interested in, and how we can figure out how to have more accountability and a more democratic process. But that hasn't, in Philly, this year was the first year that they were kind of very excited about a $1 million fund that people were able to participate in, but it felt, I think, a little bit super small scale. And I think we would need to fight for a much larger scale than just $1 million to figure out what that would look like. I will pass it to Kennedy.
Yeah, thanks, Arielle. I think that we could probably have all the same answers about our city's budget processes being incredibly obfuscated and esoteric and by design, and accessible. In terms of, how we are working to change that and how our electeds, movement electeds fit into that, oftentimes when we are engaging in these budget fights, we are making demands of an existing document, right? The mayor introduces her budget and then we make demands of that budget. And, a couple of months ago, or a few months ago at this point, we received a tranche of federal dollars of nearly $2 billion from the ARPA funds. And rather than going along with that strategy of let's just make demands of the mayor's budget, we're like, a lot of times the mayor co-ops our demands and claims them to be her own. So rather than like demanding the person who copies the homework, let's just turn in our own homework. So we wrote a 925 spending ordinance, which was like our own legislation that was very explicit about how we wanted to see the appropriation of those funds, line item by line item. And that I think was the first iteration of our legislators acting like legislators and like kind of creating the true check and balance of the mayor's actually, an executive and shouldn't be having such a heavy hand in the writing and crafting of the legislation. And so I think that was really big. And this go around, with budget amendments, we did the same thing in terms of using legislation as an accessible vehicle for communities to really engage. And so we held trainings on how to write budget amendments so that folks from community could write their own and then paired them with our electeds to get those things introduced. And I think that is like just such like a radical confrontation to power and the power structures, because, let the mayors tell it, we're not supposed to be engaging in this. We don't know what's best for us, and we're saying that we do, and like enough of like hearing how we should be prioritized and how we deserve to be prioritized. I think another thing that adds to that accessibility piece around our budgets is oftentimes we're heard that we're asking or making demands of the wrong body. And anytime we make demands to defund the police, we're told, well, because of preemption and the FOP contract, all of this is contractually obligated. And now we're like, actually, that's not true. And here is like tangible legislation that says otherwise. And so, to the point that Arielle was making, our budget hearings are like 8 hours a day, beginning at 10 a.m. when working people work, the same working people whose lives are most affected by these budgets. A lot of the negotiating that takes place once we are the ones that write the legislation and it gets introduced is not directly with us. It's on behalf of us by elected officials. And so, yeah, we are just very like left out of the process. I was actually in a meeting today with a higher up with the mayor's team and was told that they weren't in a position to answer a question. And this was like the person who was directly tasked with like writing this stuff. Right. And without people in the room that can say, actually, this is how this is done, they continue to, tell us that we're asking the wrong questions or asking the wrong people. And so by committing to, this set of movement or leftist lobbyists and parliamentarians and legislative folks and policy folks working directly with communities, we've kind of challenged that and said, we're going to do skill shares and all of this isn't going to live in like Kennedy's head or whomever's head. We are socializing this skill set to really engage with these budgets, despite, the powers that be setting it up otherwise. And I think I can stop there and pass it over. Is it you, John Wee? Please.
Thank you, Kennedy. So like you, I hear all the same similar, not helpful situation in, I guess maybe this is how local government have been set up for so long. I've mentioned before, we are very much interested in fighting the status quo. I feel like each year the city just make adjustment to the previous year budget without really like taking a critical look at the program outcomes or equity. And because of that, we continuously getting like essentially the same budget year after year. For example, I can help with the budget, like this is a funny part or ironic or whatever you want to call it. Every year, the joke is we're gonna cut the library. And then all of us pouring in and save the library. And then they're like, oh, you know what, we fund the library and everyone happy. It's like, no, it's the same budget. And even the police budget got increased, and it would, in the middle of pandemic, they would increase the police budget by $29 million last year. And the allocation to community program and services are cut and remain stagnant despite the growing need. So I always thought that was just really, really interesting way to look at it. And then now make me, question the whole system. So like you guys, I seen public hearing is setting up at 10 a.m. on a weekday, and most people can't even go out or making any comments on it or participate. And then, another one that I also make an observation is like the budget process itself have two different timelines. One for the public, which is on really show and tell. And then the other process is the internal process where all the decisions have already been made for months now. And it was just like, for example, we'd have a budget hearing on the evening of one night, and the next day the mayor release hit revise. It's like, wait, did you guys work all night long? Dropped up the revise, hearing our community member voices. So it's basically like a lot of things that we have to change, right? How to make this whole entire budgeting process to be more community centered, community led. Like, how do we ensure that people are actually at the table, are participating and hearing, that our elected official heard the people voice it. I know that there's a big change about the elected official that you do not talk to community member, but there's some of them that are having a little of the budget town hall, but I'm hoping that it will continue because the people are so used to not having conversation with our elected official. The one time thing is not gonna work. We need to continue a public education and engagement. And that is actually one of the CPA long-term goal is to ensure that the community part of the process, and then the impacted folks have to be at the seat of the table who are drafting up the policy as well. I'll stop there. I'll pass it to Liana.
Thanks so much. Yes, I would concur with a lot of the comments my colleagues have made, a lot of similarities. The Oakland budget is generally inaccessible, it's complex, it's overwhelming. And I think for us as advocates and organizers, we're primarily the ones that are translating this work and doing the best we can to engage the rank and file residents and workers in the conversation and in the political process. And so for us, what that looked like this past year, we did, I want to say at least 2 or 3 trainings. One was just to talk through what our platform was. And our platform was 5 proponents. It was like housing is a human right. It was around public services, public sector jobs, like vibrant economy, reimagining public safety, the reinvesting in arts and culture. And I'm forgetting there was one other thing, but we did some spokespeople trainings, and then, there was 2 door knocks where we targeted some strategic council districts where we knew we were going to have some pushback on our issues. And we went and talked to residents and voters and did some lit drops that kind of talked about our issues. There was also a lot of social media. We ran a paid ad campaign. I think it was focused on these different topics. So there was a lot that went into it. We did some pressers and I think like a couple rallies. And then of course, all the time we were in communication with the council members, both our allies, as well as, our potential adversaries. And so we were in conversation through the whole time. I think one big learning, and Arielle and others spoke to this, is that, the budget process is starting way before the votes are happening, right? And so even though it felt like we were working on this for a long time, I feel like we first convened the refund coalition maybe in February or March. I think moving forward, it's imperative that, we expedite our timeline so that we're not trying to make amendments to the final proposals, but that we're really informing the conversation from the get-go. And so there was a lot there. I would say, as far as accessibility, here in Oakland, we have a challenge with just language, right? The very basic, we're a very diverse population here, and yet the council doesn't have any interpretation. And I don't believe that the documents are released in, at minimum, we would need like Spanish, Chinese, and I think the other, English, Spanish, and Chinese, like at a minimum. So there's things like that. And then, council members do have town hall meetings. I think historically that's functioned as a platform for the mayor and the administration to advocate for their already proposed budget. So we have to do a lot of work to support our elected leaders to create that space for genuine conversation with constituents and really lean on them to advocate for their most underserved and directly impacted residents. So that's some of what we've dealt with here on the ground. And I think still trying to figure out, this question about how do we improve this and make it more accessible. So that I know we'll continue.
Liana, and yeah, thank you all for sharing. It's really powerful to see the way we're engaging with like this, these laws and systems, and it kind of helps us transition to what the poll, right, and like connecting that with like what folks want us to talk about next. So the two things that rose to the top are building and exercising governing power and participatory democracy, followed by multi-city and state level power building and organizing. So we only have 10 minutes, we're right on time, but we want to make sure that we hear from everyone. So we don't have to hear from all of y'all, but maybe one or two can answer a question. So does anyone want to answer the first one? And the question is, any thoughts on how budget campaigns can expand everyday people's voice and power?
I'm happy to answer that. I think that once folks start recognizing that budget processes are things that you get to engage with, things that you deserve to engage with, you are quite literally giving folks a moment each year to make like tangible demands that they get to see elected officials say, yes, you deserve this, or no, you don't. And I think that gives folks direct access to who holds the power to make meaningful changes in their lives and either stands with them on that or chooses not to. I mean, the fact that folks who have directly either experienced loss or experienced abuse as a result of failed and racist technology like ShotSpotter get to write amendments that says cancel ShotSpotter is incredible. Like the fact that we have comrades that literally are like couch surfing or sleeping outside that get to say, no, we actually want more money towards SROs. And I took a part in writing the amendment for this thing. I think it like shines light on who holds the power. It doesn't give these elected officials the ability to continue to say, I want to do better. I wish we had better. And it's like, no, actually you can do it. And here's how: sign on to this legislation, co-sponsor it. And so I think it does a great job of taking the veil off of who holds the power. It puts power in the hands of people. It's just a helpful vehicle for folks to take control and exercise the power for things that really have like direct ties to their material realities and livelihoods. Also cancel ShotSpotter once again.
Yeah, I can jump in here to kind of like continue conversation with Kennedy, what Kennedy already set up. Yeah, Kennedy, I totally with you. We try to stop the ShotSpotter here in San Diego right now, but we should talk. But I totally agree with Kennedy in a way that we do have to do a lot of public education and get people to understand what the process is, because the local government doesn't really do this job for years. They don't do a very good job at it either, because, and asking people to kind of participate now is a little transactional because like they haven't been engaged for so long. So you have to build a trust there. But one of the beautiful things I seen during the COVID pandemic was that there are a lot of asks that came together across the city. We're talking about tenant rights, eviction bans, and then rental relief for the people. But the biggest movement that I've seen is the defund the police. But despite that, we're wondering about every city. Like we still have not really seen a lot of like city council would vote for the defunded police. And I honestly, at this point, I do think that we need to engage people and educate them what the defund police really mean is, reduce the police budget and prioritize our community. And we have to take that conversation across the city, across other part of the county, up and down the state, like literally nationwide, everywhere. And we have to build that network and to talk to people about what this means in order for us to really get to that level of the movement. So I see so much possibility, even though we didn't win the vote last year, but now, every night I'm dreaming about it. I'm dreaming like, how many more people do I need to talk to about reducing the police funding, right? Like how do I do that? So start mapping this out. Let's dream it together. That's where I'm at. Like that's where I want to build the multi-state and city network together.
Thank you. I'm sure everyone has more to share on this, so I'll open it up for the next question. If you want to weave in more things, feel free to do that. So the last question is, do y'all see any opportunities for multi-city campaigning and state level organizing? There was one connection made in the last question, so any more ideas or thoughts on this question?
I think what I would add to the previous conversation, and I guess extending into this, would be how we're connecting these movements, right? Given the cycles of the budget and how we're able to then leverage the wins and the lessons to kind of continue pushing for whatever the next thing might be. I know here in Oakland, and it sounds like in other places, folks are gearing up for progressive tax fights. I think here in Oakland, we're working in partnership with other allies on ways to bring local revenue to the city's budget, and looking at different progressive tax measures to put the onus on those, the corporations. I mean, hopefully the developers, the landlords. So I think figuring out how we, can build a narrative that connects these fights, right, and continue to plug people in and engage, I think is really critical.
Yeah, I would also just add on the kind of multiple cities. I think certainly the ARP federal stimulus dollars was like something that we saw cities using in multiple ways that were maybe not what they were intended for. So I know the work in Chicago around making sure that it wasn't going to, the police or to banks, the work in Philadelphia around making sure that money wasn't being used for corporate tax breaks, like definitely has made us think about if there's going to be, further federal money at any point, like how can that then gets added to municipal budgets? How do we make sure collectively that money is going to the right place and make sure that potentially there's federal regulations on that like it was intending? And I know many of our groups were involved in sending this letter to the Department of Treasury around the ARP money to make sure that they were ensuring that cities were using it like it was intended to, and not to like give away to corporations. So that also feels like something, especially in the next couple of years, for all of us to be working collectively together on.
Definitely. And I think we're near the closing time, but this has been a pleasure to be with y'all on this panel and connect with y'all and see some of y'all in person. I know Arielle, before you joined us graciously, right before the panel today, but you and I both worked on some stuff in revenue connections in Philly. So I think there's a lot of abundance in our network and within our movement. So let's just we're just getting started, and I definitely feel a lot of hope. So with that, I just want to thank all the attendees, all the panelists, the organizers, and the help folks doing the behind the scenes work. So shout out to the PowerSwitch Action staff and Catherine to helping us, putting us in this position. And just want to continue the conversation in formal and informal spaces for sure. So definitely we're gonna have the opportunity to we're going to be sharing like the handles for the respective orgs of all the panelists. So follow them on social media, stay in contact and support if you can. And I think lastly, we are going to follow up with the thank you email, and that'll contain more information from like the panel, plus like links to other ways to connect. So stay tuned. Thanks, y'all. Peace.
Thank you so